Okay, today is, or this little video here is our third and final installment in the Non-Mendelian genetics series. This one's all about chromosomal inheritance and the inheritance of different chromosomes and how sex gets determined and how traits can be associated with that. You can see a couple little pictures up here. We'll talk about fruit flies, we'll talk about the X and Y chromosome, and we'll talk about this little thing up here in the top right corner, this funky, weird looking circle. Hopefully, y'all can see what number's in that circle, because if you can't, you should probably go get your eyes tested. It means you have red-green color blindness, and this is a classic test for a particular sex-linked trait. We're joined today by my cat, Ernie. Hi, Ernie. Good to see you, buddy. He is not a sex-linked trait, but he'll be joining us today anyway. So, sex determination is the first and easiest of the traits that's associated with a particular series of chromosomes. You guys have heard of the sex-linked chromosomes before. You guys know that mammals, we have the XY system, that males are XY, girls are XX. In fact, the Y chromosome, this little short stumpy thing over here, is called the sex-determining chromosome. If you have a Y, you are male by definition. Doesn't matter how many other chromosomes you have in case you have chromosomal weirdness. But the presence of a single Y, along with at least one X, makes you a male. X chromosome in humans and in most mammals is quite a bit longer. I'm not making that up. I know I joke about the X being very long and graceful and the Y being short and stumpy, but it really is that way. So it's a little bit different length, and therefore there can be some different genes carried on that X chromosome that simply don't exist on the Y chromosome. Down below, just to kind of point this out, there's lots of other things, other styles of sex determination systems. Most common other one that's found in the birds and the reptiles is the ZW system, kind of like ours, where there's a kind of a consistent length Z chromosome and a real variable length W chromosome. The W sometimes is longer, sometimes is shorter. What's really different in birds and reptiles is that the heterozygote one, the ZW, is actually the female. It's kind of reversed from what we have. The homozygous one, ZZ, is the male. So again, it's just the opposite to what we have. There's other systems as well. I'm not even talking about plants or funguses or any other kind of craziness. I'm not even talking about fertilized and unfertilized eggs like bees. If you're unfertilized, you have a half set of chromosomes, you're male. But if it's fertilized, double set of chromosomes, you're female. Crickets do some other kind of similar XO kind of weird systems. So there's other things out there. I'm just going to talk about mostly the XY system and a little bit of the ZW system. So in terms of who determines the offspring, just kind of keep this one in mind. I've got this little Punnett square filled out already, but it's not the mom that determines the offspring. It's the dad that determines the sex of the offspring. Mom's homozygous, right? Her eggs, her gametes, are either going to contain an X or another X. One or the other, there's no difference there. It's the dad's sperm, which carry either an X or a Y, that determine whether or not you were a boy or you were a girl. So if you're not happy, blame dad, don't blame mom. It's not something that your mom could have done anything about. And in fact, that's how they can do sex decision-making, like sex choice. If you're having in vitro fertilization, if you want to choose to have a girl or a boy, maybe because of some other genetic issues, the Y chromosome is so much smaller that the sperm that contain a Y are actually just a little bit lighter. So they can kind of do it by weight. The heavier sperm would end up with probably producing female children, and the lighter sperm would probably produce male children. So in any case, it's just a little bit of a difference there. Keep in mind that in females, obviously, birds and reptiles, the opposite is true. The females are heterozygous. They're the ones that either have a Z or a W, so they determine the sex of the little baby birds or baby lizards, whatever the case may be. The first guy that started to work with this idea of chromosomes determining sex and chromosomes carrying traits was this rather grumpy-looking fellow, Thomas Hunt Morgan. He was really the first one that realized that Mendel's factors were actually carried on these funky wiggly things called chromosomes, and that when an egg and a sperm came together, that's how those chromosomes got recombined. He worked with fruit flies, and you can see a picture of a fruit fly. These are tiny fruit flies. These are not house flies. They're kind of like gnats. Little bitty things, and they're a great organism to use because you can have hundreds of them in a little vial that size. They've got 8 chromosomes. They're really easy to see under a microscope, so it's kind of easier to do your predictions in terms of what's being carried where. They have a pretty short generation time. They eat really cheap food like mashed potato flakes, so they're really an ideal organism, and they have some really easy to determine, funky looking traits. And so he was the first guy to take a look at that idea of fertilization with chromosomes, and then that genes could be carried on chromosomes. And the classic one that he looked at is white eyes. And there's some funky looking flies. Here's one right here, a picture of one, that actually have these crazy, creepy looking white eyes. Typical flies are like the one on the left. Those are called wild type. And they just have regular red eyes. And every once in a while he'd get these white flies. So of course, white-eyed flies. So he'd start breeding them together, try to figure out, how it was inherited. He knew pretty quickly on that it was recessive because it would disappear in a generation and reappear in the next. But he noticed something kind of weird. If you see down at the bottom in the kind of the reddish text down there, when he did a lot of his traits, he was knowing this white-eyed trait was showing up much more often in male flies than it was in female flies. In fact, a lot of times he'd do certain crosses, and every single white-eyed fly would be male, and none of them would be female. This violates Mendel's rule of independent assortment, right? Independent assortment says that two different traits really shouldn't affect one another. Your eye color doesn't affect your hair color. Well, sex should not affect your eye color, but in this case it does. So he knew something else had to be going on, and the way that he explained this was saying that these two genes must have been linked, or these traits must have been linked. And in fact, he thought, or he predicted, that the sex chromosome and the white-eyed fly gene were one and the same. And so here you can see kind of one of his classic example crosses right here that he would do, where he would cross together regular male flies, just regular white-eyed wild-type males, with flies that he knew were carriers. How did he know they were carriers? Because they came from a generation before where one of the parents had white eyes. And so if you take a look at how this works, the male is going to pass on his wild-type gene, or he's going to pass on his Y chromosome. Those are his two choices for the sperm. But the female now, there's a couple of different possibilities. There's a female with red eyes. And there's a male with red eyes. Those are okay. Here's another female with red eyes. Now she is a carrier, but she does have that. And then over here is a white-eyed male. And so what you can see with this is that there's a relationship between these two traits. Because if we look at our phenotype ratio, we actually would get 3/4 red and 1/4 white in terms of eyes. But if we looked at those white-eyed flies, every one of those white-eyed flies would have been male. Not every male had white eyes, but every white-eyed fly was male. So they have to be doing something different on. And again, his proposal that has since been proven to be correct is that that white-eyed trait must be carried on the X chromosome. The X chromosome is so much longer than the Y chromosome that males literally only carry one copy of that gene. They're called hemizygous. Hemi means half. So this particular male right here, he's got that white-eyed gene on his X chromosome, but there's nothing on the Y chromosome that can kind of cancel it out or cover it up. So that white-eyed gene is expressed. That's called hemizygous. And that was kind of the beginning of the idea of sex-linked characteristics. So here's a couple of examples of some sex-linked characteristics that are in humans, that are ones that you may know. And I pointed out red-green color blindness. Again, I hope you can read that number. It's different than the number that was on the first slide. But red-green color blindness is a trait that's carried on the X chromosome. Hemophilia, which is a blood clotting disorder. Hemophiliacs, they can get a relatively minor cut, and it will bleed and bleed and bleed. Or if they get a bruise, it's huge on those guys. They simply can't stop bleeding. Duchenne muscular dystrophy, like the muscular dystrophy telethons, is also carried on the X chromosome. Now, this guy looks like a friend of mine. Male pattern baldness is also carried on the X chromosome. So with all of these, men are hemizygous. So if they only carry one copy of that particular gene, they're going to express it. Females have to carry two. And this is a little bit different than other types of traits we've discussed before. Remember, carrier females, they've got two copies of this gene. They have one on the X and one on the other X. So if they've got a regular X chromosome, it's going to cover up the effect of that problematic gene on their other chromosome. But men don't have that because they only have one version of it. If they get one version of that bad gene, they're going to express that particular trait. So again, the fact that males are hemizygous is why they're more likely to express sex-linked traits over long periods of time than under normal circumstances, than females are for sure. All right, going further. Sorry about that. Going further, if you're looking for some other things to study, if you're looking for a 4, here's some ideas for you. You can take a look at any of the traits that we've got. You can take a look at some more of Thomas Hunt Morgan's. There's tons and tons of fruit fly mutations that are out there that you could study. You can look up some other sex determination systems. If you're interested in some other kind of weirdness, you can look up these things called bar bodies and how that works. You can answer this question if you have cats. If you're a cat friend, why are calico cats almost always female? You can take a look at things like Fragile X syndrome, color blindness, and in role of the environment. It is possible for females to have pattern baldness, but it shows up much more often in men, so that internal environment plays a role in there. So there you have it. I hope you like this little piece of information here about sex-determining chromosomes, sex systems, and sex-linked traits. See you in class tomorrow.